What happens when a CEO goes undercover as a janitor and overhears his own management mocking their employees? Daniel Carter had built his company from the ground up. It started as a single store, a small dream fueled by years of hard work. Now, with over a dozen locations across the state, he should have felt proud, but something was off. Complaints were piling up about rude managers, unmotivated employees, and poor service. Customer satisfaction was slipping, and internal reports gave him nothing but vague excuses. Daniel hated feeling disconnected. He used to know every employee, every struggle. Now his corporate office felt like a fortress, shielding him from the truth. So he made a decision. If no one could give him real answers, he'd find them himself. A week later, Daniel walked into one of his stores, unrecognizable. His salt and pepper hair was dyed black, his usual suit replaced with cheap khakis and a faded sweatshirt. A thick pair of glasses and a fake name on his ID tag, Mike, completed the disguise. No one here had met him in person. Most employees only knew his name from company emails or photos in the break room. He was starting at the bottom, janitorial duty. The perfect role. No one pays attention to the guy mopping floors. His first few hours were uneventful, just scrubbing sinks and wiping down counters. But then, as he pushed his mop past the break room, he heard voices. "Did you see Jessica crying again?" A deep chuckle. "She's always whining about how she cares about this job." "Like, girl, it's retail, no one cares." Another voice, sharper. "Yeah, and don't get me started on Lewis. Dude actually stays late to help customers. Total teacher's pet." "We should start calling him Lapdog Lewis." Laughter. Loud, mean, Daniel froze. His hands gripped the mop handle. He recognized those voices. The assistant manager, Greg, and the store manager, Denise. Two people he trusted to lead this location. "Corporate's so out of touch, though," Greg continued. "They think hard work matters, please." "I just cut hours for the people who annoy me. Jessica, she's down to 15 next month. That'll shut her up." Daniel's stomach turned. So this was how they ran things, mocking the best employees. Cutting hours out of spite, he forced himself to move, to breathe. He couldn't blow his cover, not yet. He needed to see more to understand the full picture. For now, he kept mopping. But inside, the fire was already burning. Daniel kept his head down, his hands gripping the mop as he processed what he'd just heard. The people he trusted to lead this store were actively sabotaging their best employees. It wasn't just incompetence, it was cruelty. He forced himself to stay calm. If he reacted now, he'd blow his cover. He needed to see more. Later that afternoon, he was assigned to clean near the stockroom where he caught sight of Jessica, the employee Greg had mocked earlier. She was restocking shelves, moving with careful precision. Despite the exhaustion on her face, she still smiled at customers who passed, even helping an elderly woman find an item from a high shelf. Daniel noticed how tense she looked, constantly glancing toward the front of the store. She was expecting something, anticipating trouble. And then trouble arrived. Denise walked up with her arms crossed. "Jessica, why are you still on this aisle? You should have finished this 10 minutes ago." Jessica straightened. "I had to help a customer." "I don't care," Denise snapped. "You waste too much time on people. That's not your job." Jessica's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. Daniel could see the fight in her eyes, the way she swallowed back words she wanted to say. Denise smirked. "You're lucky I haven't cut your hours more." Then, without another word, she turned and walked off. Daniel felt his fists clench. It was one thing to hear them mocking employees in private. It was another to see them tear down a hardworking person right in front of him. Jessica exhaled, shaking her head before returning to her task. Daniel saw his chance. He walked over, pretending to check the supplies on his janitor's cart. "Hey," he said casually. "That seemed rough." Jessica gave him a tired smile. "It's just how it is here." She always talked to you like that? Jessica hesitated, then nodded. Yeah, and to others too, but if you push back, your hours disappear. So you just learn to deal with it. Daniel felt the weight of her words settle in his chest. His employees weren't just being mistreated, they were being controlled through fear. He had built this company to be different, to be a place where people felt valued. Instead, it had become just another toxic workplace. He needed to see more. By evening, Daniel was assigned to clean the back office, where Greg and Denise were counting registers. He moved quietly, making sure they didn't pay him any attention. "Did you finalize the schedule?" Greg asked. Denise smirked. "Yeah, Jessica's down to 15 hours. Louis too, that'll teach them to make us look bad." Greg laughed. "Perfect." "Oh, and I moved some extra hours to Todd and Brian." Daniel recognized those names. Todd and Brian were the laziest employees in the store. He had already seen Todd ignoring customers, and Brian spending more time on his phone than anything else. Denise raised an eyebrow. "They suck, though." "Yeah, but they don't complain," Greg said with a shrug, "and they know how to kiss up, that's what matters." Daniel had heard enough. He finished cleaning and left without a word, but his mind was racing. They were rewarding laziness and punishing dedication. If this was happening in one store, how many others were like this? That night, he barely slept. He thought about Jessica, about Louis, about all the employees who were being pushed down for trying to do their jobs well. He thought about Greg and Denise, running his store like their own personal kingdom. Tomorrow, he would gather the final pieces of this puzzle, and then it would be time for the reckoning. The next morning, Daniel arrived early, still in his janitor disguise. Today was the day everything would come to a head. He had seen enough. He had heard enough. Now, he needed to push things just a little further before he revealed the truth. As he mopped near the registers, he noticed Louis arriving for his shift. The young man looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, but he still greeted customers as he walked in. Daniel watched as Louis immediately went to help an elderly couple struggling with their bags, even though he wasn't on the clock yet. Greg, standing by the manager's station, rolled his eyes. "Look at this guy," he muttered to Todd, who was leaning against the counter, scrolling through his phone. "Always trying to be a hero." Todd smirked. "Yeah, makes the rest of us look bad." Daniel had to bite his tongue. It was infuriating to see someone who genuinely cared about the job being mocked for it. He needed one last piece of confirmation of just how bad things had gotten. An hour later, Denise called Jessica into the office. Daniel pretended to be cleaning nearby, moving slowly so he could listen in. "I don't know what you think you're doing," Denise said, her voice sharp. Jessica sounded confused. "What do you mean? You've been talking to customers too much again," Denise snapped. "This isn't a charity. Your job is to stock shelves, not play customer service hero." "But isn't that part of the job?" Jessica's voice was hesitant but steady. Denise scoffed. "Not if it slows you down. And since you don't seem to understand that, I'm cutting your hours again." Daniel's blood boiled. That was it. He had seen enough, heard enough. He couldn't let this continue another second. He dropped his mop, straightened his posture, and walked directly into the office. Denise and Jessica both turned to him, confused. "What are you?" Denise started, but Daniel cut her off. "I've seen enough," he said, his voice steady but firm. Jessica frowned. "What?" Daniel reached up and pulled off the cheap glasses he had been wearing. Then he ran a hand through his dyed hair, messing it up just enough for his natural color to show through. He saw the exact moment recognition dawned in Jessica's eyes. "Oh my God," she whispered. Denise's face went pale. "Wait, no, that's not possible." Daniel turned his gaze to her, his expression unreadable. "It's very possible," he said. "And we're going to have a serious conversation." He stepped out of the office and raised his voice loud enough for the entire store to hear. "Everyone, gather around." Now, employees stopped what they were doing, confused but obedient. Greg strolled over casually until he saw Daniel's face. His smirk disappeared instantly. "Let me introduce myself properly," Daniel said, scanning the room. "I'm Daniel Carter, the owner of this company." A stunned silence followed. Employees exchanged shocked glances. Lewis looked like he was trying to process whether this was real. Jessica stood frozen, her face a mix of shock and something else, hope. Denise and Greg looked like they wanted to disappear. Daniel turned toward them, his voice dangerously calm. "I've spent the last few days in this store watching how things run, listening, learning." His gaze hardened. "And what I've learned is unacceptable." He looked at Jessica and Lewis. "I've seen employees who go above and beyond for customers, who care about their jobs only to be punished for it." Then his eyes snapped back to Greg and Denise. "And I've seen managers who mock, belittle, and actively undermine those employees." Greg swallowed hard. "Sir, I'm not finished," Daniel cut him off. He turned to the rest of the employees. "If you've ever felt mistreated or undervalued by management here, speak up now." A hesitant pause. Then Jessica raised her hand. "I have," she said, her voice stronger now. Lewis followed. "Me too." Then another employee, and another. Soon, nearly half the staff had their hands raised. Daniel nodded. "That's all I needed to know." He turned back to Denise and Greg. "You're both fired, effective immediately." Denise's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. "Wait, no," Daniel said, his voice absolute. "You've abused your authority, created a toxic work environment, and driven away good employees. This isn't up for discussion." Greg shook his head, trying to keep his cool. "You can't just walk in here and—" "I own this company," Daniel interrupted. "I absolutely can." Security, who Daniel had quietly informed earlier, stepped forward. "Please collect your things and leave." Denise and Greg had no choice. They stormed out, their faces burning with humiliation. As soon as they were gone, Daniel turned back to the employees. "Things will change here starting now. No more punishing good workers, no more rewarding laziness. Anyone who has concerns, my door is open, always." Jessica's eyes shone with gratitude. Lewis looked relieved. Around the store there was a shift, a weight lifting, a new beginning. Daniel had come undercover to find the truth, and now he was going to rebuild this place the right way. The store was silent for a few moments after Denise and Greg walked out, the weight of what had just happened settling over everyone. Then, slowly, the tension in the air began to ease. Employees exchanged looks, some whispering to each other, others just standing in stunned silence. Daniel took a deep breath. There was still a lot to fix. Firing 2 managers wasn't enough to undo the damage they had caused. He turned to the assembled employees, his voice steady but firm. "I know this isn't going to fix everything overnight," he said. "But I promise you, things will change, and they'll change starting today." He looked at Jessica and Lewis. "You both have been treated unfairly, and that stops now. Your hours will be restored starting next week. And I'll personally make sure that from now on, hard work is rewarded, not punished." Jessica's lips parted slightly in surprise, as if she hadn't dared to hope for this outcome. Lewis gave a small nod, still processing everything. Daniel continued, addressing the entire staff. "I want to hear from all of you. I want to know what else has been happening here that I haven't seen. If you've been mistreated, ignored, or if you have ideas on how to make this a better place to work, I want to hear it." For the first time, employees didn't hesitate. A cashier spoke up. "They used to cut shifts without warning. We'd show up only to find out we weren't scheduled anymore." Another worker from the stockroom added, "They made us clock out early to save money, but still expected us to finish all our tasks before leaving." Others chimed in, detailing a pattern of favoritism, intimidation, and poor management decisions that had driven morale into the ground. The more they spoke, the angrier Daniel became, not at them but at himself. How had things gotten this bad without him knowing? "I appreciate your honesty," Daniel said when they finally finished. "And I'm not going to ask you to just trust that things will change. I'm going to show you." He pulled out his phone and made a call. Within the hour, a regional manager and an HR representative arrived. Daniel had them set up in the break room, where employees could privately report concerns and make suggestions. Then he turned to operational matters. He addressed the remaining supervisors, making it clear that moving forward, leadership would be based on merit, not favoritism. Promotions would be earned, not handed out to those who simply knew how to stay on management's good side. Jessica and Louis were both asked if they wanted to take on leadership roles in the interim while a new store manager was selected. Jessica hesitated before agreeing, while Louis accepted immediately. Over the next few hours, Daniel worked side by side with employees, not as their boss, but as someone who understood their struggles firsthand. He stocked shelves, ran a register, and even helped unload the latest shipment in the back. As he worked, he listened. Employees who had been quiet before now spoke freely, sharing their frustrations and their hopes for a better workplace. By the end of the day, the energy in the store had shifted. There was no more fear, no more looking over shoulders. Employees moved with more confidence, knowing they were finally being heard. As Daniel locked up for the night, Jessica approached him. "I never thought I'd see this happen," she admitted. "I thought things would just keep getting worse." Daniel met her gaze, his expression serious. "That's on me. I should have known what was happening sooner." She shook her head. "You know now, and you did something about it. That's more than most people in your position would do." Daniel gave a small nod. He knew this was just the beginning. There were still other stores, other managers to check in on. He couldn't let this happen elsewhere. But tonight, at least, he knew he had made a real difference here. And he wouldn't stop until every one of his stores was a place where employees were respected, valued, and given the chance to succeed. The next morning, Daniel sat in his office, the weight of everything he had uncovered still pressing down on him. The store he had just visited was only one of many. If this kind of toxic leadership had taken root there, how many other locations were suffering under the same neglect? How many good employees had been driven away because of managers like Denise and Greg? He wasn't going to wait for reports or second-hand accounts anymore. He had seen what that led to: filtered information, excuses, and a growing disconnect from the reality of his own company. No, he needed to go deeper. Daniel pulled up a list of all his store locations. He had visited one. There were 12 more. He wasn't going to stop at just one undercover operation. This had to be bigger. Over the next 2 weeks, Daniel visited 5 more stores, each time in a different disguise, taking on roles from stock clerk to cashier to warehouse assistant. What he found was a mixed bag. Some stores ran smoothly, with managers who respected their employees and genuinely cared about the business. But others mirrored the toxic environment he had seen in the first store: favoritism, employees afraid to speak up, and managers who treated power as a tool for control rather than leadership. At one location, he watched a supervisor berate a cashier in front of customers for not upselling enough. The young employee's hands trembled as she tried to hold back tears. Daniel had to force himself to remain in character, but he made a mental note of the supervisor's name. At another store, he saw a hard-working warehouse employee, Malik, constantly picking up the slack for his coworkers while his manager ignored it. When Daniel casually asked Malik why he didn't say anything, the man just shrugged. "Speaking up doesn't change anything," Malik had muttered. "They only listen to the ones who kiss up." That was the moment Daniel knew this wasn't an isolated issue, it was a systemic problem. By the end of his undercover visits, Daniel had a list of managers who needed to be replaced, employees who deserved recognition, and policies that needed immediate reform. He didn't waste time. Back at headquarters, he called for an emergency executive meeting. His top regional managers and HR representatives filled the conference room, unaware of what was coming. Daniel stood at the front, his expression unreadable. Then he began. "For the past few weeks I've been working undercover in our stores," he said plainly. The room went silent. Some exchanged nervous glances, others leaned forward, intrigued. "I've seen the best of our company," he continued. "Employees who are dedicated, who care about their work, and who go above and beyond for our customers." He paused, letting his words settle before his tone hardened. "And I've seen the worst." He listed the incidents he had witnessed: the mistreatment, the favoritism, the culture of fear that had taken root in several locations. He named names, pulling no punches. He could see the shock on the faces of some executives who had thought things were running smoothly. "This is unacceptable," Daniel said firmly. "And it ends now." He laid out his plan. First, immediate terminations of managers who had abused their power. Some executives hesitated, concerned about backlash, but Daniel shut them down. "I will not keep people in leadership positions who undermine the values of this company," he said. "If that means making tough decisions, so be it." Second, a restructuring of how promotions and raises were handled. No more favoritism. Employee evaluations would include peer feedback, ensuring that those who actually contributed were recognized. Third, a whistleblower system, allowing employees to report workplace issues anonymously without fear of retaliation. Finally, Daniel announced a series of surprise store visits, this time without disguises. He would personally be dropping in on locations at random to check on operations. No more hiding behind reports and corporate filters. By the time the meeting ended, the tone in the room had shifted. Some executives looked nervous, others energized. Change was coming, whether they liked it or not. Over the next few months, the impact was undeniable. Toxic managers were replaced. Employees who had once felt powerless now had a voice. Customer satisfaction began to rise as morale improved. Jessica, Lewis, and Malik, they were all promoted into leadership roles. Employees who had once been overlooked were now shaping the future of the company. And Daniel, he no longer felt disconnected from the company he had built. He had seen the truth firsthand, and he had done something about it. This was just the beginning.